My name is Charlotte Mercer. I'm 41 years old, and I spent most of my adult life believing that competence was currency, that if you worked quietly, efficiently, and with precision, the people who mattered would notice. They would value you. They would protect you. I was wrong. The day I realized how wrong came on a Thursday afternoon in November, inside a mahogany-paneled conference room that smelled like old leather and expensive cologne. I was sitting at the far end of a table long enough to land a small aircraft, watching a man I'd known for 15 years read my father's will aloud. His voice was steady, polished, entirely devoid of emotion. And to my daughter, Charlotte Mercer, I leave the sum of $1 to be paid within 30 days of probate. $1. Not the house I'd helped renovate. Not the company I'd kept afloat during his illness. Not even the vintage desk set he'd promised me when I was 12, the one with the brass nameplate that said, Future CEO. $1. My brother Nathan sat across from me, hands folded, face carefully neutral. My sister-in-law Vanessa looked at her phone. And the lawyer Leonard Hastings, the family attorney who'd been at every birthday, every holiday dinner, every milestone for the last decade and a half, didn't even glance up from the document. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't ask why. I simply nodded once, stood up, and walked out. What they didn't know, what none of them could have known, was that I had spent the last 6 months quietly preparing for exactly this kind of betrayal. Not because I'm paranoid, because I'm thorough. And by the time Leonard Hastings looked up from that will, the clock had already started ticking on the most meticulously planned reversal of fortune he would ever experience. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really began. My father, Richard Mercer, built his wealth the old-fashioned way. Real estate development in the Midwest, careful expansion, calculated risk. By the time I was born, he owned a portfolio of commercial properties across 3 states. He wasn't a billionaire, but he was comfortable. Very comfortable. I was the oldest child. Nathan came 5 years later, and from the moment he arrived, the family dynamic shifted in ways I didn't have words for at the time. I was 12 when I started noticing the pattern. Nathan got the birthday parties with magicians and bounce houses. I got dinner at home with a store-bought cake. Nathan's report card went on the fridge. Mine went in a drawer. Nathan's Little League games had both parents in the stands. My debate tournaments had neither. My mother, Patricia, didn't hide her preference. She just never acknowledged it. If I pointed out the imbalance, I was being difficult. If I stayed quiet, I was mature. So I stayed quiet. I threw myself into school, into work, into becoming indispensable. I graduated early, got a degree in business administration, and by 23 I was working directly under my father at Mercer Holdings. I learned the properties inside and out. I knew every lease, every tenant, every cash flow projection. Nathan, meanwhile, spent his 20s traveling, starting companies that folded within months, dating women who tolerated him because of the Mercer name. He was charming, aimless, and perpetually broke. And yet, when my father got sick, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, diagnosed 18 months before he died, it was Nathan who moved into the guest house, Nathan who sat beside him at doctor's appointments, Nathan who played the devoted son. I was the one running the business, fielding calls from bankers, keeping the revenue streams alive while my father deteriorated. But I wasn't in the room when decisions were made. I wasn't consulted about the will. I was useful, not valued. Leonard Hastings knew all of this. He'd been my father's attorney since before I was born. He'd watched me grow up. He'd shaken my hand at college graduation, complimented my work ethic, even joked once that I'd make a better CEO than Nathan ever could. And then he sat in that conference room and read the words that erased me from my father's legacy. $1. I remember walking to my car afterward, the November wind cutting through my coat. I remember sitting in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, breath fogging the windshield. I remember the silence pressing down like water. And I remember the moment I decided I wasn't going to fight this in court. I was going to dismantle it from the inside. The thing about being underestimated your entire life is that people stop watching you. They assume you've accepted your role. They assume you're harmless. I spent the first week after the reading doing exactly what they expected. Nothing. I didn't call Leonard. I didn't confront Nathan. I didn't make a scene. I went to work. I answered emails. I kept the properties running. But in the evenings, I opened a file I'd been building for the last 6 months. See, when my father got sick, I started noticing irregularities. Small things at first. Payments that didn't match invoices. Lease renewals signed by Nathan that gave tenants suspiciously favourable terms. Bank transfers that moved money between accounts in ways that didn't align with our standard procedures. I'm not a forensic accountant, but I know how to read a ledger. And what I saw didn't make sense, unless someone was siphoning money. I started documenting everything. I made copies of files before they could be altered. I downloaded bank statements. I recorded phone conversations where Nathan bragged about restructuring deals that, when I looked at them closely, were just giveaways to his friends. And I noticed something else. Leonard Hastings' name appeared on a lot of these transactions. Not as a witness, as a co-signer, as a facilitator. Leonard wasn't just the family lawyer, he was Nathan's partner. The will wasn't just unfair. It was the final step in a long-term plan to push me out entirely, liquidate my father's assets, and split the proceeds between Nathan, Vanessa, and Leonard himself. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I'd take my dollar and disappear. They were wrong. I want to pause here for a moment. If you've ever been written out of something you helped build, if you've ever watched someone take credit for your work, or if you've ever sat quietly while people underestimated you, I'd love to know where you're watching this from. Drop a comment. Tell me your city, your story. Because what happened next? It wasn't just about me. It was about every person who's ever been told they don't matter. And if this story resonates with you, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. There's more where this came from. 2 weeks after the will was read, I called Leonard Hastings' office. His assistant answered, her voice bright and efficient. Hastings and Associates, how may I help you? This is Charlotte Mercer. I'd like to schedule a consultation with Mr. Hastings. There was a pause. Regarding? Estate planning. Another pause, longer this time. 1 moment, please. When Leonard came on the line, his voice was smooth, cautious. Charlotte, I wasn't expecting to hear from you. I need advice, I said calmly. I'm considering setting up a trust. I'd like to discuss the process. Of course, he said, though I could hear the faint edge of confusion. When would you like to come in? Tomorrow, 2 o'clock. I'll have my assistant send you a confirmation. I hung up before he could say anything else. The next afternoon, I walked into Leonard's office wearing a navy suit and carrying a leather portfolio. His receptionist smiled at me with that practiced politeness reserved for clients who might be trouble. Leonard greeted me in the lobby, shaking my hand with both of his. Charlotte, good to see you. Come on back. His office was exactly as I remembered. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive oak desk, framed diplomas on the wall. The kind of space designed to make you feel small. I sat down, crossed my legs, and smiled. So, Leonard said, settling into his chair. You mentioned a trust. I did. I opened the portfolio and pulled out a single sheet of paper. But before we get to that, I wanted to clarify something about my father's estate. His expression shifted just slightly. What kind of clarification? The distribution. I slid the paper across the desk. I've been reviewing the financial records and I noticed a few transactions that don't quite add up. Leonard picked up the paper. It was a summary I'd prepared. A list of transfers, dates, amounts. Nothing damning on its own, but enough to suggest a pattern. He scanned it, then set it down. Charlotte, I'm not sure what you're implying, but I'm not implying anything, I said. I'm stating facts. Over the last 2 years, approximately $1.3 million moved through accounts that Nathan controlled. And in each case, you signed off on the paperwork. His jaw tightened. Nathan had power of attorney. Those transactions were entirely legal. Legal, yes. Ethical? I tilted my head. That's debatable. Charlotte, if you're unhappy with the will— I'm not contesting the will, I interrupted. I'm just curious about the consulting fees. He went very still. I leaned forward. You billed my father's estate $47,000 in the last 6 months of his life. For what exactly? Drafting a will that took you an afternoon? Or advising Nathan on how to restructure deals that benefited him personally? That's absurd. Is it? I pulled out another document. Because I have emails, I have bank statements, and I have a very detailed timeline that shows you weren't just his lawyer, Leonard. You were Nathan's accomplice. The colour drained from his face. I'm not here to destroy you, I said softly. I'm here to offer you a choice. He stared at me, breathing hard. You can keep pretending that will was fair. You can keep cashing Nathan's checks and hoping I go away. Or— I paused, letting the word hang in the air. You can tell me everything. Leonard Hastings didn't crack immediately. He tried bluster first, threatened to call security, mentioned something about defamation. But I didn't move. I just sat there calm and patient until the fight drained out of him. What do you want? He finally asked. The truth. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, he looked older, tired. Nathan came to me 2 years ago, he said quietly. He said your father was slipping, that he wasn't thinking clearly, that the company needed someone who could make decisions quickly. And you believed him. I wanted to believe him. Leonard rubbed his temples. Nathan said you were too rigid, that you'd run the company into the ground with your caution. He said if we could restructure things before your father died, everyone would be better off. Everyone except me. He didn't answer. So you helped him, I continued. You helped him siphon money, sell off properties below market value, and draft a will that left me with nothing. It wasn't supposed to be nothing, Leonard said, his voice cracking. Nathan promised you'd get a position in the new company, that you'd still be involved. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. And you believed that too. Leonard looked down at his desk. I'm sorry, Charlotte. I truly am. Sorry doesn't rebuild what you destroyed. I stood up. But here's what's going to happen. You're going to write an affidavit detailing every transaction Nathan made with your assistance. You're going to testify, if necessary, about the coercion, the misrepresentations, and the breach of fiduciary duty. Charlotte, I can't— Yes, you can. I placed both hands on his desk, leaning in. Because if you don't, I'm going to the state bar with everything I have. And when they disbar you, when your reputation is destroyed, when Nathan realizes you're a liability and turns on you to save himself, you'll have nothing. He stared at me, mouth opening and closing. Or, I said, straightening, you work with me, you help me fix this, and when it's over you walk away quietly. No charges, no scandal. Just retirement. Why would you do that? I smiled. Because I'm not Nathan. I don't destroy people for fun. But I also don't let them destroy me. Leonard sat there for a long time, the weight of his choices pressing down on his shoulders. Finally, he nodded. I'll do it. It took 3 months to unravel Nathan's scheme. Leonard gave me access to files I didn't even know existed. Emails between him and Nathan discussing asset reallocation. Documents showing properties sold to shell companies Nathan controlled. Bank records proving that my father never approved half the transactions Leonard signed off on. It was worse than I thought. Nathan hadn't just stolen money. He'd leveraged my father's declining health to systematically strip the company of value, funneling it into personal accounts and fake consulting firms. And Leonard had made it all look legal. But here's the thing about meticulous documentation. Once you have it, the story writes itself. I filed a civil suit in early March. Not just against Nathan, against the estate, the executor, and Leonard Hastings personally. I alleged fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, undue influence, and elder abuse. Nathan's lawyer tried to dismiss it, called it a disgruntled siblings' vendetta. Then I released the affidavit. Leonard's testimony was damning. He detailed every conversation, every transaction, every lie. He admitted that Nathan had pressured him, that he'd ignored red flags, that he'd prioritized his relationship with Nathan over his duty to my father. The media picked it up within days. Family attorney admits role in estate fraud. Daughter fights back after $1 inheritance. Nathan tried to settle. Offered me $500,000 to make it go away. I declined. Not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted justice. There's a difference. The case went to trial in September. It lasted 2 weeks. Leonard testified. I presented my evidence. Nathan's lawyer tried to paint me as vindictive, but the numbers didn't lie. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They ruled in my favor. Full restitution of assets, punitive damages, and an order for the estate to cover my legal fees. Nathan lost everything. The properties, the money, even the house my father had left him. And Leonard? Leonard kept his word. He testified. He cooperated. And when it was over, he quietly closed his practice and moved to Arizona. But before he left, he asked to see me one last time. We met at a coffee shop near his old office. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "Good," I replied, "because I'm not offering it." He nodded, staring into his cup. "For what it's worth, you were always smarter than Nathan." I should have seen that. "You did see it," I said. "You just didn't care." He flinched. "But I'll tell you what I do care about," I continued. "I care about rebuilding what you helped destroy, and I care about making sure no one else in my position gets erased the way I almost was." Leonard looked up. "What are you going to do?" I smiled. "I'm taking over Mercer Holdings. I'm restructuring it, and I'm hiring people who actually believe in accountability." He stood, extending his hand. I didn't take it. "Goodbye, Leonard." He dropped his hand, nodded once, and walked out. I never saw him again. It's been 2 years since the trial. Mercer Holdings is thriving. I've brought in new management, sold off the underperforming assets Nathan had mishandled, and expanded into markets my father never considered. Nathan lives in a small apartment across town. Last I heard, he's working in sales. Vanessa left him 6 months after the verdict. And me? I still drive the same car. I still wear sensible shoes. I still work quietly, efficiently, with precision. But now, when I walk into a boardroom, people stand up. Not because I demand it, because I earned it. The family lawyer who helped disinherit me doesn't work for me now, not literally. But his testimony, his cooperation, his final act of honesty, that became the foundation I rebuilt everything on. And sometimes, late at night, I think about that conference room, the mahogany table, the smell of leather and cologne, the sound of Leonard's voice reading my father's will. $1. I still have it, you know, framed on my office wall, not as a reminder of what I lost, as a reminder of what I'm worth.